We'll get a call when I have you say the pledge, Dan. If you rise, we're going to say the Pledge of Allegiance as we open a public hearing. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll open a public hearing on Senate Bill 364 and recognize the prime sponsor, Senator Innes, to introduce his bill and tell us about it.
Good morning. It'll be a short story today. This is very similar to bill last year in the budget, designed to, sorry, I have the wrong notes in here, designed to provide some support for historic housing, a historic housing preservation tax credit. I need more coffee this morning. And I'm bringing that back to you today. And the idea here is to help to not only to work towards solving our housing problem in the state by providing additional support, we've done much of that, but also to kind of keep around those historic buildings that matter and those that are listed on the National Register of Historic Places or perhaps on the State Register of Historic Places. And what we want to do is encourage developers to convert these buildings into housing that will be useful for folks going forward. So this was passed and supported last year, but didn't make its way into the budget. So we're back with the same idea. There's some really good folks here. I know the housing folks are here who can address this. And I think they'll be able to answer most of your questions, although as I understand it, Senator Rosenwald, you may have one or two.
Yep, Senator Roosevelt.
Thank you. I do have a couple of questions, if I could. On the affordable housing, the historic tax credit, I'm trying to wrap my mind around the nexus with giving a credit on the insurance tax. And
Okay.
I'm wondering if that's something you're committed to?
Not at all. No, we can address that.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
And could I ask? Yeah, a separate question. So the other half of the bill appropriates $15 million to invest NH. Given that we've already put $110 million into that, do we have a sense of what the parameters are around affordable housing, or is that something we should be thinking about and maybe declaring a policy on?
Are you referring to the amount of housing in a particular structure that is considered affordable? The percentage?
Yes, or the percentage, or I'm not aware that there are any statutory requirements
Right.
on affordability, and I'm wondering if you think, as I do, that with taxpayer money, perhaps we should.
I think that's a very reasonable position to take because to my knowledge, there are no set numbers, say a percentage. And I know in some communities, particularly in other states, those requirements are in place. You know, it must be 25% or something along those lines. I would certainly be amenable to an amendment that addresses that, and I think it might be a wise decision.
Great. Well, so I'm happy to work with him.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
there we go.
Actually, Senator, I have one question for you as
Yes,
well.
sir.
Is there an individual maximum credit in the bill?
There's not.
There's not. So the cap is $10 million a year, it looks like. So
Yeah.
one individual could potentially put $10 million towards this.
Potentially.
And get the full credit and take it all up at once.
I suppose that's possible.
Thank you.
The housing folks may be able to address the likelihood of that happening or how often it could. I'm not sure, but it's something we can take a look at. We could put a cap in place, but at the same time, you don't want to discourage the preservation of a truly
Understood.
historic structure. So, okay.
Thank you. I'm all set.
Okay.
Come join us back up here, please. Come join us back up here. Next up is going to be Lisa Marsala. Is that her name? Lisa from Housing Action New Hampshire. Sorry, if I butchered your name, I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Alyssa Margolin. I serve as Director of Housing Action New Hampshire. We're a statewide coalition of 80 organizations united in support of increasing the supply of affordable housing to Granite Staters. We're in support of Senate Bill 364 that would create a new historic housing preservation tax credit and make an additional appropriation to invest in H. A couple of points here. New Hampshire's housing crisis is severe. As noted in a hearing before Senate Finance yesterday on another housing bill, our housing crisis is one of the worst in the country. Recent polling has demonstrated that housing is viewed as the #1 issue for New Hampshire families and businesses. The shift in public opinion is likely connected to the very real impacts of the affordable housing shortage, workforce shortages in every sector, including essential services, disincentives for business growth, barriers for young families to call New Hampshire home, challenges for housing choice and challenges in housing choice for retirees, debilitating financial impacts on lower income families, and growth in the number of people, including children and older adults, who are experiencing homelessness. Yesterday, many testifiers noted that we need a multifaceted approach to solving this crisis. There are a lot of reasons we ended up in a crisis as severe as the one that we're facing, and we need an all hands-on-deck type of approach. So this bill complements the package that you included in the most recent budget and leverages solutions that will open up new avenues. We need more multifamily rental housing, but we also need smaller scale conversion projects. We need more affordable single-family homes, and we need more manufactured housing. Investments like this and new tools like a historic housing tax credit would create much-needed housing while preserving historic structures. In many ways, it offers communities opportunities to revitalize and preserve treasured history. I want to just make a couple of comments about Invest New Hampshire. We had advocated in the last budget that you increase the required affordability period from 5 years to 10 years, and you did that. We had asked for 20 years. That would put Invest New Hampshire at with the same statutory requirements as other state affordable housing programs. So we repeat that request that we think 20 years is a reasonable amount of duration of affordability when using public dollars for this type of favorable financing. We are members of Housing Action New Hampshire, particularly our developer members who participated in Invest New Hampshire in the application process, has asked us to ask the legislature to codify a more quantitative approach to the application process, something with points and more transparency about the application process. But we do think that it has resulted in more units that will be affordable to Granite Staters and support this bill. So we thank your committee for your consideration of this proposal. It's okay.
Next up is Alan Ritz.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you very much for taking my testimony. And I'd also like to thank you for your ongoing work. As we know today, many of our state employees are out there inside and outside and behind the scenes, really cleaning up after a storm. So we see the action that your work puts in motion. For the record, my name is Alan Reitz. I appear before you as an employee of the Hanover Co-op Food Stores and Auto Service Centers. Much of my work for the Hanover Co-op is focused on affordable housing. As a Plainfield resident of 30 years and a traveler to all corners of our state, I've become very familiar with New Hampshire's iconic architecture. We all see it in our cities and tiny hamlets. Passage of Senate Bill 364 will mean restoration and economic impact within those communities and a boost to the local character our residents so often speak of. To illustrate that potential, I have 3 brief examples on my testimony that I'll skim over right now, all on one road in my village of Meriden. As you'll see from the photographs, they are classic in design, yet the first one, like too many structures in our state, sits vacant in a state of growing disrepair, but the bones are good. The next one is a very large home that until recently was long occupied by an elderly couple. It's an ideal example of a possible conversion to 3 apartments. For both, SB 364 can mean character preserved, housing created, business boosted. Of course, without 364, impending tax increases would be a non-starter for most property owners to undertake. Then there's the third example. Until the 1970s, it was a schoolhouse and eventually became a tax-exempt art museum, then sat idle. Today, it has been fully restored to 3 2-bedroom dwellings, home to couples who have downsized, freeing up their former homes to new families. And that schoolhouse is now bringing tax revenue to the town of Plainfield. Imagine such transformation in the communities you represent. I'm sure you can think of examples. That schoolhouse, of course, would have happened without the historic tax credit, but only because a local builder was able to step in and preserve it. These days, few can afford to do that in the face of the full tax hit. Every one of us sees too many historic buildings deteriorating in our state. SB 364 can bring back many onto local tax rolls at a fair rate, and most importantly, reinvigorate those structures and our shared heritage to help address New Hampshire's housing crisis. It's a smart bargain, classic buildings restored, apartments for young and old, and sensible tax credits for those doing the heavy lifting. Thank you for your consideration of Senate Bill 364 and the appropriation to Invest NH. Your legislative lift moves us from imagining solutions to making homes. Thank you. Happy to address any questions you have.
Seeing none, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Next up is Jennifer Goodman from the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance, speaking in support.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Chairman and members of the committee. I'm with Jennifer Goodman, the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance, the statewide historic preservation organization. Before you, as the chairman said, in strong support of Senate Bill 364. And I just wanted to speak to a moment to the historic tax credit provision. We're certainly very excited about this. It feels like a missing tool in the toolbox. Nearly 40 states around the country have variations of this tool that are used to revitalize older buildings for new uses like housing. And the studies show these kind of investments leverage catalytic private investment, increasing rehabilitation, supporting highway jobs, conserving energy and resources, and providing broad benefits to their communities. As Mr. Rees said, I'm sure you all can picture vacant or underutilized buildings in your communities that could benefit from this sort of investment. So we stand ready to help you. Hope we can move this forward. As nonprofit and for-profit developers have said, this is a missing tool in the toolbox. Our neighbors in Massachusetts and Maine have this kind of investment, and we're frankly losing commitments to these rehabilitations to those states. So excited to have this before you. Thank you very much, Senator Innes, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative D'Alessandro.
First of all, thanks so much for coming. In the old days, just the opposite was taking place. We were ripping down these buildings and destroying them. And in Manchester, we were terrible in terms of reaction to that. We took all of these buildings down. Would this, if this indeed were in place, would it save some of those magnificent structures that in the past we've torn down? And I think of the railroad station in Manchester that was destroyed.
Yeah.
Under quote unquote urban renewal. We're going to save the world. We're going to make the world better by getting rid of all of this old property.
Yeah.
Can this do it?
I think this is a really important tool to help do that, to see more revitalizations instead of loss. I think there's districts in Manchester right now to the south that are struggling to find the win-win of doing historic preservation and housing, and this certainly would be a help in that.
Further question? Would indeed the locals have to be on board to have some kind of a synergistic relationship? If the state were to do the tax credit, the local activity, they would have to be consistent and work with it, would they not?
Yeah.
And it seems to me there hasn't been that desire on the part of locals to preserve this property.
Well, I mean, you're speaking to a real turnaround in Manchester for sure, and I hope that a tool like this, it can continue to help that momentum going forward. And true in rural communities too, where there's been really tenacious efforts to try to save older buildings, but there are ones being left out that are just hanging there in the balance, and this kind of tool can be a very useful help in that.
Thank you, Stu.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Rob from New Hampshire Housing.
Thank you very much, Chairman Lang and members of the committee. I'm Rob Dappas. I'm the Executive Director of New Hampshire Housing. We're an independent self-supporting corporation established by state law with a mission to finance, support, and housing solutions for the people of New Hampshire. And we have a letter in support of Senate Bill 364, which we noticed an error in it this morning. I'll be emailing it afterwards to the committees or my colleague Ben. We, over the years, have financed many historic preservation projects all over the state, old mills and school buildings in cities and small towns in every area of the state. These projects have improved neighborhoods and increased property tax revenues, created jobs in local design, engineering, and construction industries, preserved cultural heritage, and made New Hampshire more attractive to visitors and residents, and provided affordable housing in an environmental way. These historic rehab projects currently have to rely on the federal historic tax credit, and we've seen fewer of them since the 2017 federal tax reform weakened that credit. As a result, it's just fewer projects are able to make the numbers work with that federal credit. And so a state credit could layer onto the federal credit and make projects more likely to be feasible using the federal credit. It could also, we would work with partners like the Preservation Alliance and Division of Historical Resources and CDFA to develop a flexible and streamlined process so that smaller projects, which often can't work with federal credit right now just because of the sort of overhead and soft costs associated with lawyers and consultants, might be able to make the numbers work with a state tax credit. And so we're excited about it for those reasons. As Jennifer mentioned, 39 states have a state credit, and those states are better able to ensure the maximum utilization of the federal credit. For example, I looked last night at the National Park Service reports, and Maine and Rhode Island, relatively comparable in terms of the population and the age of the building stock, both using significantly more federal historic tax credits. And so the federal credit is doing work in those states to make those neighborhoods beautiful and vibrant and attractive to visitors. It's doing work in those states that it's not doing in New Hampshire, and this bill would be a great step in the right direction to fix that. I just wanted to mention, Senator Rosenwald, you asked about the sort of role of the local municipality, and something that we see all the time in housing work is NIMBY opposition. And we find it so deeply ironic that the places that people love most in their communities are often illegal to build now because of parking requirements and setbacks and things like that. And that's codified in zoning at the local level. That's just very, very complicated to unwind, in spite of the fact that people like these old buildings. And so we have this wonderful asset in a lot of communities. They're complicated and at times expensive to rehabilitate, but I think this credit would be an important step in the right direction to preserving those properties, keeping our neighborhoods beautiful, and providing housing in one go. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but thank you very much for listening.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask Keen to come on up from DRA. He's our last, he didn't sign up to speak, but I have some questions for him. So I'm going to have him come up. He's the last speaker for this bill. So my simple question is, as you read the bill, I want to make sure there's no mechanical defects in the bill for DRA's purposes, because we know we're going to have an amendment, and if there are mechanical defects, I want to correct them.
For sure. Good morning, Mr. Chair, and good morning, members of the committee. My name is Keen Mei Wong, Tax Policy Council, New Hampshire Department of Revenue.
Good morning. My name is Lauren O'Sullivan, Senior Financial Analyst at the Department of Revenue.
Right. As always, the DRA does not have a position on this bill, and as the chair has mentioned, we are here to answer questions. The only thing that we noticed for a technical defect would be the effective date. Right now, on I guess page 2, line 33, the effective date is June 30th, 2024. Usually, because if it relates to a tax credit and applies to tax returns, we would prefer it to have a taxable year ending December 31, 24 or 2025, whichever the committee determines.
I'm sorry, what kind of date you're looking for, an effective date?
December 31. Those
December
taxable,
30th, end of the
taxable
calendar
years.
year, not the.
Yeah, so taxable years ending on or after December 31, then the year. Yeah. Yeah.
Anything else you see in mechanical for this?
No, yeah, everything else, because it's a repeat bill, except for a change in the amounts from the five, I believe it was changed to $10 million. Other than that, it's really, we didn't notice anything else.
I'm sorry? Just the dollar figure change for the maximum tax credit. We vetted that in the last hearing we had last year. The only other question I had was, and I was trying to understand this, was the Invest NH fund as it exists as a whole. What's the function of that fund? It's just affordable housing, or how does that, do we have any, because what I'm thinking of is, right now we have the CDFA fund, which comes out of, I think it's LCHIP money and tax credit grants. And that's used for improving, the LCHIP grants are used for improving structures, and that's managed by the CDFA, right? And it has a very specific function. I'm a little, when I read this, this looks like the money's going to go into the Invest New Hampshire fund, if I'm reading it right. I'm not sure, because there wasn't a separate fund created just for historic preservation. So who manages, is that a BEA that manages that fund? And how would we know that the funds going into the Invest NH are used strictly for the purposes of historic preservation? If that's the goal.
I do not know. That may very well be a good question for Treasury, because they ultimately manage all the funds, and they can perhaps give more detail on what agencies work with them on maintaining that.
Okay. Any other questions from committee members? Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Oh, I'm sorry, one more. Maximum, are you okay with, and I know it's a policy decision, but I'm also a little worried. So we talked about maximum individual credits versus maximum credits that can be issued as differential. In some places we have, like, you can have a maximum, you can put in for, I think it's the scholarship, the education scholarship fund, you can put up to $2,500. We have a max per individual, and then we have a max for the fund as a whole for the number of contributions, basically, and they can issue for credits. So my question is, do you have any concerns the fact that there's no individual limit on this, just a maximum cap on total funds? And should there be a limit? And my other question was around Section 5 that talks about unused portion may be carried forward for no more than 5 years, succeeding years, but not exceed $1 million in any given tax year. And my concern was, again, we just put a new law in that starts talking about overage and excessive tax payments and credits and carry forwards. And could that potentially cause a problem between the 250% carry forward and the 500% carry forward, the 100% carry forward? Does that language give us any problems?
Relating to the carry forwards, the 500% to 50%, that's a different, I guess, a different bucket altogether, because that's carry forward, credit carryover of taxes that's already paid, that's sitting in the state's account.
Got it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So this is a credit against.
It's the other way. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
taxes, right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just a quickie, in the Invest New Hampshire Fund, I'm not familiar with the Invest New Hampshire Fund. Is that a restricted account, non-lapsing account? And who holds the Invest New Hampshire Fund?
That'll go back, that, it's a good question for Treasury. We're not aware if that's a restricted fund or not.
Okay, so we would have to address, that to the treasurer. So I wonder if there's any money in that fund as we speak, and how that money is being allocated. But you say it's a question for the treasurer.
Right.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So BEA manages that account. So we have to talk to Commissioner Caswell and his staff to figure out how that money, what it's used for, how it's used for. But we're not going to exec this obviously today because we do have an amendment coming in from Senator Rosenwald and Innes. But so we can ask them before our
Okay,
next
great.
hearing. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
And with that, I'm going to close. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on Senate Bill 364? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing on Senate Bill 364 and open the public hearing on Senate Bill 363 relative to wagering on simulcast dog racing. And I recognize Senator Innes, the prime sponsor, to speak. Senator Innes.
Good morning again, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Senator Dan Innes, representing District 7, resident of Bradford, New Hampshire, and I'm the prime sponsor of Senate Bill 363. And in 2010, New Hampshire made the policy decision to ban greyhound racing. However, we left a loophole in place, and that loophole contributes to the suffering of many greyhounds. Specifically, we allow for betting on out-of-state and foreign dog races with no or minimal animal welfare protections through a process called simulcasting. Simulcast wagering is a form of gambling where bettors wager remotely on races that take place somewhere else. Granite Staters bet $6 million annually on dog simulcasting at one location, the Brook in Seabrook. It's the only casino in New Hampshire that engages in greyhound simulcasting. And as I understand it, at least $500 million is wagered per year at the Brook on all forms of gaming. Meanwhile, remote greyhound racing represents just 1% of all betting at the facility. In fiscal year 2023, the state received almost $91,000 in revenue from greyhound racing, an amount that will be recovered many times over with new revenue from sports betting at the Brook. This proposal is very simple. For example, passing this bill will not result in the closure of the Brook, nor would it have a significant financial impact on funding received by the city of Seabrook. It doesn't end horse racing. And more importantly, passing this bill has no impact on charities. Charities do not receive a single dollar from greyhound simulcasting. Of significant importance is that the Brook receives a greyhound broadcast signal from a low-grade track in Tijuana, Mexico. This is one of the worst dog tracks in the world, and it's owned by George Hank Roan, who is reportedly linked to Mexican cartels. I'm hopeful this legislature will repeal greyhound simulcasting in an effort to help end the cruelty to greyhounds, and New Hampshire will no longer continue to support the generation of revenue for the state or any New Hampshire gaming facility from a source linked to illegal activity. In an effort to save time for the committee, I'm happy to take a few questions, but I think there are many folks behind me who will be testifying on this particular bill and will be very capable of addressing those questions. I think this is a good bill to help dogs. I think it's the right thing to do, and I hope the committee will support it. Thank you.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I understand it, Senator, the only active dog track in the United States is in West Virginia.
Yes, it's in Wheeling.
And it plays a role in,
It does.
you know, in the West Virginia economy because
Yes.
it's sending that signal out every place. I realize we don't receive a lot of money, and I know that PETA has been instrumental in eliminating dog racing in New Hampshire. But other than West Virginia, you said Tijuana. Is there any other signal that we accept in New Hampshire?
Not to my knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none. Next up is Gary Field.
Chairman, members of the committee, Carrie Teal, Executive Director of Grade 2K USA. I'll be brief. I'm going to touch on a few of the points Senator Innes made, not in depth, but I did also want to just start out by further providing some information regarding Senator D'Alessandro's questions. There's 2 dog tracks in West Virginia, Wheeling and Tri-State. Those are the final 2 dog tracks in the United States. The state of the state of West Virginia actually receives 0 revenue from the export handle. So all of the simulcast gambling that's occurring elsewhere, including, for example, here in New Hampshire, the state of West Virginia receives 0 revenue from the simulcasting feeds. In fact, the only reason greyhound racing still continues in West Virginia is the industry is heavily subsidized under a state law that both requires casinos to hold dog races and also requires $17 million in annual subsidies. The company that owns those 2 tracks, Delaware North, which I know is also active in New Hampshire, has actually publicly stated it wants racing at those 2 facilities to end. So I would dispute the idea that this is an economic boon for West Virginia or any other state. Also, to address your other question, Senator, there are some other tracks that are also simulcasting into New Hampshire. In addition to the 2 West Virginia tracks and Caliente, which is of great concern to us, the Brook is also accepting, or until literally a few days ago, was accepting simulcasting fees from dog tracks in Ireland, the United Kingdom, as well as, I believe, Australia. So although the overwhelming majority of those feeds is West Virginia. I'm happy to go into my testimony, Senator. If you have any other questions before I jump into that. I do. Oh, no, okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so I just thank you for the opportunity to speak before you, and thank you, Senator Ennis, for your leadership on this good bill. As he said, 14 years ago when this was prohibited in New Hampshire, the legislature looked at this and tried to find a solution that would both help the dogs and also create a bridge for what was then Seabrook Greyhound Park to try to transform itself. I would argue that 14 years later, that policy has succeeded. The Brook is a thriving facility with sports betting, historic horse racing, charitable gaming. So looking at it today, there was testimony given in 2013 by a representative for Seabrook Greyhound Park saying that at that point, Greyhound simulcasting was 43% of all gambling at the facility. Today, it's about 1%. And as Senator Ennis said, there's very little tax revenue coming to the state for this activity. Charitable operations are receiving not a single cent in revenue from Greyhound simulcasting. So for us, we look at this as, the time is right to now come back and look at this again and say, the policy to give the Brook a bridge has succeeded. Let's give the dogs some consideration here as well. At the 2 tracks that were mentioned, just in the last 2 years, there were about 1,300 greyhound injuries. 407 dogs suffered broken legs. 17 dogs died. Also, my nonprofit over the past couple of years has documented in 4 states a practice called live lure training where greyhounds, and again, these are the greyhounds people in New Hampshire are betting on, where greyhounds are given small animals to tear apart. It's an unconscionable practice. Finally, I just want to emphasize again the fact that until, again, just a few days ago, the Brook was accepting simulcast fees and New Hampshire dollars were leaving the state to fund Agua Caliente, a Tijuana-based racetrack owned by an alleged cartel associate, is something I think every member of the legislature should be concerned about. And I know there's an argument that you just let this die on its own. I understand that, but it does not make sense to me if the 2 West Virginia tracks close, which I think they will, to have a Greyhound simulcasting law on the books where you can be seeing signals from Caliente, from Vietnam. That to me just makes absolutely no sense. So I would urge you to give this bill not to pass. New Hampshire has a proud tradition of leading on animal welfare issues. I think the bill 14 years ago is a compromise, and I would urge you to look at this again. And please, in light of the Brook being so successful through this transition, give the dog some consideration and allow this piece to end, which is really not an economic driver for anything. So with that, I'll take any questions you have. Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Kurt Ehrenberg, State Director of the Humane Society of the United States. Very simply, I would say I'll support my friends who just spoke. A wonderful organization doing great work to save dogs all around the world. Today, I think the matter at hand is very simple, very simple. If you have or now love a dog, you really must vote in favor of this bill. Ought to pass. That's my testimony today. Thank you.
From the committee? Seeing none. Thank you, Kurt. Next up is Alicia Preston. Oh, all right. Not on this bill. Anybody else like to speak on Senate Bill 363? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing on Senate Bill 363. And we'll move into, which means I need to get the gavel to you while I testify. Senate Bill 472.
You ready?
Thank you, Senator. Senator Tim Lang, District 2. I am introducing Senate Bill 472. If this bill looks familiar, there's a reason for that. As we know that this topic of historic horse racing licensure and a moratorium have been on the docket both in the House and the Senate several times. We currently have a bill held in abeyance coming over from the House, Senate Bill 112, which does a similar thing and similar language, with the exception of on page 2, the effective date. I'm sorry, not the effective date. Yeah, the effective date. And the difference is in the previous bills, we passed this bill or a similar bill that had a commission on it. We broke the commission off as a separate bill, and Senator D'Alessandro and I serve on that commission. And this is just the rest of that language about a moratorium on historic horse racing and what we need to do. Again, the reason we had the two coupled together originally was to give the commission time to work and then to make its decision on what it wanted to change in charitable gaming and look at it as a whole and not just through a straw at one item within charitable gaming, but look at the entire picture of charitable gaming, what that looks like. And so I'd asked for a moratorium, to extend the moratorium for a couple of years to give us time to look at what we wanted to do in big picture and not just start changing pieces of gaming individually that then breaks up everything the commission's doing because they're trying to look at it and we're giving them a moving picture to try to look at. So this bill does that. I will tell you that I have an amendment to this bill that'll come. So when we're ready to exec it, there'll be an amendment. And the amendment would be to take care of the gaming operators have agreed not to pay rent, charge rent back to, and that's in Senate Bill 112, and it didn't get into this bill due to when it was drafted. And I would look to add that to this. So depending on irrespective of what we do, Senate Bill 112, that language, which has a permanent moratorium, would be drafted into here, where this is just a temporary moratorium for a few years out until we see what the commission comes down to. That's the bill.
Any questions?
We've heard it before.
Just with the Senator, the sale of a license, there's currently a situation in place where a decision has been made and an opportunity has been given an entity to sell a license. That's a period of time. Would this in any way interfere with that decision? Would that negate it?
So
Would
let me
this
just
negate it fast?
correct one statement. We don't sell licenses in the state of New Hampshire. It's actually illegal to sell a license. Once an organization owns a license, it's an asset of that license. If you sell the organization, the license will go with it. So the sale, what you're talking about is the sale of an LLC and the assets that belong to the LLC. This does not change that.
Okay, so this would have no effect on that.
Correct.
Any further questions? Thank you very much,
you.
Senator Legg. Appreciate your testimony. Representative Timothy Horgan is here to speak in favor of the bill.
I'm pleasantly surprised that I'm here. So as you just mentioned, Representative Timothy Horgan from Stratford County District 10, the towns of Durham. So, and I have a bill which is coming through House Ways and Means and which does one piece of this, which is extending the moratorium on the new licenses. And that was something that was originally put in the bill that created the commission. The governor took it out for reasons I didn't find very compelling, but that's neither here nor there. So, and I think there's a lot of unanswered question about these things. And one of the main point I wanted to come in and briefly make today is that the way these are, at least the way these are being used in New Hampshire, for example, I took a field trip down to the Philotimo Casino in Dover, which, you know, is a very nice little place. People are having a good time, but they were just slot machines. In fact, actually, the user interface is also one that's used for, you know, conventional slot machines. So really the only, I mean, I guess if you press the right combination of buttons, you get a little bit of information about the race, which I think is just like the jockey's winning percentage and the horse's winning percentage. So it's not, you know, you can't really do any very serious handicapping. I'm sure my grandmother who lived around the corner from Churchill Downs wouldn't find that very entertaining. But so that's, I think, you know, there is a demand for slot machines. There's a lot of problems with slot machines, but, you know, most people use them responsibly, and I'm not sure whether the historic horse racing really adds much to it. I think it's just I guess it was originally created as a way of like supporting the horse racing industry, but I think it's just you know, it's just another piece of how they randomize the results of slot machines. I think actually it's probably an unnecessary complication and probably makes it easier for people to like hack into the system and you know, hack the results. And so I just think we probably should be looking to, and that's probably outside the scope of this bill, something that's like deciding whether this in fact is the right form for slot machines to take in New Hampshire. And there's also, of course, still the debate about whether we should have slot machines at all, although, you know, they're well established. You know, people are, these so-called charitable casinos are located all over the state, and people are enjoying them. So that's so I just feel like this is a good bill, but at some point we're going to have to sort out the whole issue of like whether we want slot machines and what form of slot machines we should take, and that also means they're probably in the wrong section of the RSAs too. So since this is dealing with horse racing, so. That's what I wanted to say, but I certainly, I'm sure if this bill comes across the wall, I'll be inclined to vote for it. So thanks.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Yes, are there any questions? Senator?
I just have a clarification. I just want to make sure we don't keep talking about slot machines, because slot machines are technically different.
Yes.
Because this is a pari-mutuel arrangement. It's not a single machine arrangement where slot machines are that machine and only that machine. It's irrespective of everybody else that bets. Whereas historic horse racing is a pool, and it's a different type of machine. So I just want to be clear that New Hampshire doesn't have slot machines.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yes, I understand. But I mean, it's a distinction that I understand there's a difference, and your explanation was a good one, but I'm not sure whether that means much to the people who are sitting there, you know, feeding their coins in the machine, and in most cases, responsibly enjoying themselves and having a good time. So thanks.
For the purpose of the legislature, I want to make sure we're clear and use the correct wording when we're speaking.
Of course, yes. I mean, that's what we have now, but.
Thank you, Mr.
I
Chair.
will say the shells, you know, okay, the actual interface is the same as interfaces they use on conventional video lottery terminals, but thanks.
Thank you for your testimony. Any further questions? If not, thank you so much for your testimony. Alicia Preston, this is your name now, Alicia Preston. Give us the Greek name, please.
Xanthopoulos, which is why I keep pressing on the badge.
Let's add a little culture to this testimony. Hey, give us the Mediterranean culture, which indeed will give us a magnificent testimony.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am here representing the New Hampshire Charitable Gaming Operators Association, and we are here to speak in favor of this bill. I wanted to note, as Senator Lang mentioned, there is Senate Bill 112 that'll be coming to this body. It is identical to this bill once the rent amendment that Senator Lang mentioned is added to it, with the exception of the length of the moratorium. The moratorium in this bill would extend for 4 years. The one in 112 would be an indefinite extension, and we are supportive of both.
Great. Any questions for Alicia? First of all,
Thank you. Have a great day.
wonderful to see you. You've added culture to the testimony. Thank you. Are there any further individuals who wish to testify in this bill? Yes, please. Come right to the front. You're usually on housing,
Yeah.
so this will be a change of pace.
Right, Senator, thank you. I'm here representing the New Hampshire Center for Nonprofits. Since Chairman Lang raised the issue around SB 112 and a future amendment around rent repeal, I thought it'd be helpful to the committee to know that the New Hampshire Center for Nonprofits, the statewide association that represents the charitable sector, supports rent repeal. We want to remind our policymakers that we have gaming in the state to support our state's charities. And we also feel it's not appropriate for the charitable sector to be enriching gaming operators. So we thank you for support of rent repeal.
Are there any questions for?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it. Is there anyone else who wishes to testify for or against Senate Bill 472? If not, we'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 472.
Oh, you got it again, because I'm flying on this.
Okay.
473.
473. No setups? Thank you. We'll open the hearing on Senate Bill 473 and call upon the prime sponsor, Senator Lang. The bill deals with governing unclaimed horse racing ticket and voucher money.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. This bill tries to clean up some process that happens in the state of New Hampshire. As you know, in the state of New Hampshire, unclaimed monies, things like bank accounts, stocks, those kind of things, go to the treasurer, and the treasurer holds them for 24 months. And then if nobody's claimed, then it defaults over to the general fund. And they have an advertising requirement and everything else. One of the other things that goes in there is unclaimed gaming money. With the new advent of historic horse racing, which we just got done talking about, the vouchers, and if you've ever played the game, you put your money in the machine and then you get at the end, you get a slip, and you take the slip and you go to the cage and you cash out your cage. Vouchers can't be identified to a person. We don't keep track. It's just a slip of paper that's given out as part of the machine process, and you have to take that there and take it and withdraw funds. The problem is that occasionally people will not cash in their vouchers, and that money ends up sticking on the books as a potential payout that was never actually done. So it's unclaimed revenue, but it has no identifiable person. And so sending it to the treasurer to have them try to advertise for a person to come pick up their unclaimed 23-cent voucher from the Brook would be problematic, to say the least, with the number of vouchers. And so I tried to clean up this provision for historic horse racing, this new pot of unclaimed money. And what this bill basically does is say that on July 1st, for that previous calendar year, so in other words, not the immediate year that just was done, but the year before that, the charitable gaming operators will total up the amount of unclaimed voucher money that's pending, that they're still holding on their books, and they will basically write a check to the treasurer, the state of New Hampshire, for that total amount of money, and that money will deposit it into the Governor's Scholarship Fund. That's it. Trying to make it cleaner, easier, and simpler for everybody.
Questions?
Just a quick one.
Sure, say it is.
Do we have any idea how much goes unclaimed each year?
There is a fiscal note. We expect that it's in the hundreds of thousands, not millions.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Further question? Senator, the paper that you receive, that's retained by the individual. What length of time does that individual have to turn that voucher in?
So under this bill, it would be 1 full year.
Or 1 full year?
1 full year to turn. Well, actually, technically, they have 2 full years because it's a.
Now, under the achievement process, we have, unclaimed monies. They have a period of time I think it's more than a year. This would be 1 year as you're presenting this.
So again, so if I walked in a charitable gaming location and I had a ticket issued on, say, January 1st of 24. In this bill, what would happen is that would not be turned over to the state until July 1 of 26. So I'd have all that time to go and cash in my ticket.
Sure.
But once they write it off their books on July 1, I can no longer go into the facility and cash my ticket.
Okay, thank you. Senator Nealis?
So as I read the fiscal note, it appears half the revenue will be retained by the horse racing operators and half will go to the Governor's Scholarship Fund. Is that right? Just to clarify.
So I see that as part of the note. That was not the intent of the bill. And this is an updated note that came in.
Yeah.
And so I'll find out why. The intention was 100% would come back to the, 100% of the unclaimed winnings would come to the state.
Right.
So that's the intention of the bill.
Yeah,
I'll find out what,
Yeah,
someone else, Senator Rosenwald mentioned the same thing to me, and we'll find out if the language change has to happen when we're ready to exec it. But the intent of the bill is that 100% of the revenues would come to the state for the purpose of the Governor's Scholarship Fund.
Okay, thank you.
So does that clarify that?
Yep.
Okay, then Senator, would you propose an amendment to clarify that? So
I have to find out where they think that says it in the bill. I don't see it, but,
I didn't see it either.
so I don't see it, but somebody says it does exist, so I'll just clarify, and if an amendment is needed, I'll bring it.
Great. Someone from lotteries here that will give us.
And John can speak to it.
Okay. Any further questions for Senator Lang? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Also, there's a reporting requirement. So when the gaming operator submits the money to the treasurer, they also have to submit a report about here's how many tickets we had, here's how much money it totaled. So lottery can keep track of that as well.
Right. Great. Thank you. Thank you. State your name for the record, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. John Conforti, Chief Compliance Officer for the New Hampshire Lottery Commission. I think I can just clarify the fiscal note a little bit. So our interpretation when we did the fiscal note was that historic horse racing vouchers were being taken out of consideration at all. So those were going to be retained based on the strikeout at line 4. So if we misinterpreted that, I think that language could be restored. And at that point, the full $400,000 would be coming into the treasurer to go to the Governor's Scholarship Fund. So that was, again, we may have misinterpreted the language on that, but that strikeout we read as historic horse racing vouchers not being needed to be sent to the treasury.
Great. So it's clear, it's clear that the intent of the sponsor and the intent of the Lottery Commission is that all of the money would be transferred to the general fund if it's not redeemed.
We would be happy to do that, and obviously if Senator Lang's intent, obviously it's an easy change to the fiscal note at that point. It's the full $400,000 that are coming forward.
Great, and I think Senator Lang, that is your intent.
That is absolutely the intent, is that 100% of the revenues would go into the Governor's Scholarship Fund, not the general fund, the Governor's Scholarship Fund.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for that clarification, sir. All right, is there anyone else who wishes to testify for or against Senate Bill 473? If not, thank you very much for attending. I'll close the hearing on 473 and turn it back to Senator Lang. Let's see what happens.
Thank you. All right. We're just gonna have a quick discussion amongst the committee about going forward. I think you all would have, Sonia, did we email the amendment yesterday to all the committee members? So all the committee members, you should have got the amendment to the advanced deposit wagering bill with the non-germane amendment attached to it. And we're gonna be scheduling that for next week to have a public hearing on that non-germane amendment. And to remind you all what the non-germane amendment does is, and thank you, John, for helping me craft language. It requires a charitable gaming operator set aside 10 days for municipalities that any revenue comes in, just like a charity would go to the municipality, instead of to a charity for those 10 days. It allows for some reimbursement basically to this local communities, and it's per gaming operator. So that we'll be hearing that next week. I'm hoping next week will be an exec week. That's usually planned by the end of the meeting. We're going to go into executive session. We're going to try and grab as many of these bills and as many amendments that'll come in and exec them. So we can get them off our plate and done. And I guess that's kind of it. Anything from any committee members about coming up? I did hand out to all the committee members, there's a report for a committee that I was on called the Annual Report of the Joint Committee on Tax Expenditure Review. And that was in relative to Senator Innes's bill on a historic tax credit. The one thing I'll just make a statement of is that in the review of those tax credits, we found them to be valuable and useful for their intended purpose, right? Whatever the purpose was that was designed for them, they've been used for that, and they've been a benefit to the economic community of the state of New Hampshire. So I just thought people might be interested in, as we're talking about creating another tax credit, what the history of what tax credits look like. So.
I think that the problem with that piece of legislation is the 15 minutes.
Well, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that when we get into exec. Other than that, anything else to come before the committee? Seeing none, we're adjourned. Keith, sorry to come running.